Welcome to the Customer Smarts podcast, where you'll discover smarter ways to deliver customer experiences. I'm your host, Justin Stafford, and in this episode, I've got a special guest, Anthony Gregorio, joining us. Ant is one of the best leaders I've worked with. He's been CEO of some of the most successful marketing agencies in Australia, including Saatchi & Saatchi and Havas. We're going to talk about leadership, building a great culture, customer strategy, and how to sell ideas from a true master. Welcome, Ant. Thanks for coming on the podcast, mate.
Thank you for inviting me, Justin. Good to see you. Feels like we're almost working together again, which is nice.
Yeah, mate. It's some of the best times, wasn't it?
It certainly was. It certainly was. You look a lot more professional though than the t-shirts and jeans I'm used to seeing you in.
Yeah, I think so. I got sick of wearing my my pajamas in COVID times, so I thought I'd dress it up a little.
You're good, mate. You look good.
Thanks, mate. And of course yourself, the best hair in advertising. I mean, I'm jealous. I'm getting a bit silver here, so.
You know what? I've still got hair. At my age, it's something to be, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, that I've still got hair at my age. And it's certainly, I'm actually thinking of growing it longer and longer just to stick the knife into all of my mates who have pretty much gone bald. Yeah.
We'll give it a go, mate, because, I'm probably going to be in the bald camp at some point.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a nice little hair lesson for everyone.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's been a bit over a month since you finished up at Saatchi & Saatchi's. You were running the show there for 5 years. And you recently posted a thank you post on LinkedIn, which got a truckload of reactions and, 300 really nice, amazing comments. You're obviously, a very popular man. I noticed you responded to each and every one of them with a personalised response, which to me, I think typifies your style of leadership. You're a real man of the people. You speak to everyone at all levels. And from my perspective, I think that's why you've been, such a great leader. So what I'd like to know is your leadership style something that just kind of came naturally, or have you proactively worked at it over the years?
Thank you, Justin. That's humbling way to start. Certainly, I was a bit humbled with the reaction to that post, sort of letting people know I'd left, and I really used it to highlight some of the people that I wanted to say thank you to in terms of the time I've spent, at Saatchi's and Publicis Group. But and the response was really overwhelming. I think, and you kind of say, the words that you have about me, but you've known me for a long time, and it's true. I very much value the interaction that I have with the people that I work with, and I think being naturally empathetic as a human being has also been something that sort of I've taken into my leadership style, and I think that that's been a big part of the reason, if I've been successful at all, a big part of the reason why I have been successful. Has it come naturally? I think that I've, grew up in a very humble background. I'm the son of an economic migrant. My dad came to Australia with nothing and built a life in this country. And he always, with limited education, taught me, just some of the basic rules of life, be nice to people and treat them well and treat them the way you'd like to be treated. And so those are a couple of sort of humble early lessons that I've always kept with me. And then through my working life, I've combined that with learning from some excellent leaders, and you do have to be, you can always improve on anything. Even, if you're an average golfer, you play golf more, you'll get better at it, etc. And I think leadership's the same thing. You have to work on it. And I've been lucky enough that I've learnt from. I think most of my development from a leadership point of view has been watching good leaders that I've been around over my career and learning mostly what to do, sometimes what not to do.
So what are watching good leaders? What do good leaders do then? What did you pick up? What are the top couple of things?
I think empathy, first and foremost, you're dealing with human beings, and human beings have thoughts and feelings, and you dismiss those, then then you're never going to break through to them. So I think that's part of it. I think being yourself, being authentic. You know me, I'm a pretty what you see is what you get kind of guy. I don't mind having a laugh and a joke, and I'll bring that into my day to day, which is good. But be who you are. Don't try and be someone else, and just be open and honest. You know, even when you've got things that, you know, are not always easy to say. Sometimes you have to say things that to staff that you don't want to say. Sometimes you have to have challenging conversations. But if you treat those conversations respectfully and with openness and humility, you know, then you're largely going to get a very positive result, even when sometimes you have to say something that's not great to someone or to staff about a situation. And I think those are the things that keep you in good stead as a leader.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are complaining about their bosses, and I think a lot of people get put into management positions and not necessarily have the skills. Where do you see people, I guess, getting leadership wrong? What are they doing wrong that they might not be aware of?
Well, I think it's hard, really, in a lot of ways, because in most organisations, certainly in agencies, that, you know, which is where the vast majority of my career has been, you don't really get any formal leadership training. You know, you can learn to be a good strategist and designer and account guy, but leadership is not specifically taught. You know, sometimes you get it through osmosis in terms of what I talked about earlier, but I think if you're open and authentic and you're willing to receive feedback, then that's probably the best way to learn. Like, I think if you shut people out and don't and think you're the font of all knowledge, I certainly have never and don't think I'm the smartest guy in the room ever. You know, but going into an approach where you're willing to listen, and receive feedback, then I think those things really help you grow as a leader and as a person. You know, no one's perfect. And I think the other thing I would say is that I've made a point of staying close to people I really value in terms of leaders. So I've got a couple of people I've worked for in the past that I'm very close to, still very close to, talk to regularly. You know, you can use the word mentor or coach, and you know, both those things are good if you can find the right mentor or find the right coach. I suppose I'd just say these people are friends. You know, these people are close friends who I've worked with for a long time, and I've always found to be great leaders. And you know, they're always willing to receive a phone call or grab up, you know, put aside some time for a catch up over a coffee or a sandwich, and I can ask some questions. And I think sometimes that's the other thing about leadership is it can be quite lonely, and you can make it worse by shutting everyone out. And I think one of the things is to find people you trust and talk to them. It's almost as simple as that.
Yeah, great. Now, you talk to a lot of business leaders and CMOs. You're pretty well connected. What are some of the things that CMOs are finding challenging at the moment? What's keeping them up at night?
Yeah, a lot. It's a pretty turbulent time. You know, there's a volatile economy. Supply chain instability is rampant, improving, thankfully, but still, you know, rampant. And these are both big factors. You know, this leads to changing customer expectations and predictability. You know, also the overarching pace of change with new technology. That's another factor. The other factor is every organisation's chasing profitable growth whilst trying to create efficiencies and drive down costs. It really sort of feels like a perfect storm at the moment. And then, you know, overlay that with finding and keeping great talent and balancing wage inflation, and then getting people back into the office. It really is tough. And I think CMOs cop it from all angles. And I think what this leads to in terms of the greatest problem that they face is sort of balancing, it's getting really hard to balance long-term vision and short-term goals because there's so many short-term issues. And I've heard it said, any idiot can sacrifice long-term vision for short-term results. The trick is balancing the two. And I think that's a real, balancing act for CMOs. And look, it's not just, a thought from my position, or my perspective. I think there's a lot of really well-respected people in the field that will tell you, Les Binet and Peter Field are big advocates that you need to balance both long and short-term goals. Especially because this is proven. If you just run a business for the short term, even if it's a succession of multiple short term wins, you still underperform over the long term as a business, and that's been proven. So I think the real trick for CMOs is sort of balancing the short and long term priorities that exist in businesses today, and there just seem to be so many more short-term priorities that we're still getting thrown up because of COVID, the long tail of COVID, and all the issues that we know that people have been facing in the last 3 years.
And what are some of the ways on how to do that balancing job? How do you manage that when, I guess, a lot of the CMOs are getting heat from all the short-term demands from around the different business units? That's sort of what I've seen. It's hard to be in that position you're trying to nudge forward, you keep getting pulled back, like you say. How do you sort of keep striving towards that long-term vision and sort of nudging forward whilst ticking the boxes and doing that job, like you say, that balancing act?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. And I think discipline is really the key. I think you have to be quite disciplined as a senior leader to sort of make sure that you are addressing both the urgent and the important. And there's that classic sort of quadrant box, important, not important, urgent, not urgent. And, you make sure you rule out the things that are, not important and not urgent, but sometimes they end up bubbling up to the surface. So, I think you gotta keep your eye on the important stuff, the quadrant above the line that's important, and remember that, even if it's in the not urgent box, it will fall into the urgent box if you leave it too long before you start addressing it. And I think, I actually found it quite useful to do my to-do list in those four quadrants, because if you keep writing the same thing in a box and leaving it and have never touched it, you realize after a few weeks that you're really not addressing it, or you're not putting any time into it, which is an issue. So, I mean, obvious things to do, but sometimes those old school sort of tricks are the right ones to sort of employ.
Yeah, exactly. I think people get quite often distracted with, technology and all the new things coming out. So now AI is creating a whole storm of new distraction. I think, the metaverse and all those kind of things distracting CMOs, like what do I need to look at?
Yeah.
They've got their own program they've got to worry about, but then you add these other things and they're constantly sort of coming up and then getting pressure from around the organisation.
Yeah, I remember more 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Metaverse. It was like the amount of presentations on Metaverse I had to do or ask people to do. And, you're right. It's not that you shouldn't be keeping an eye on this stuff and keeping across it, but sometimes we apply, a disproportionate amount of time to things that are shiny and new, and we forget the basics of the important stuff. And so, leave some time to be thinking about what's innovative and what's coming down the pipe, but don't put too much time into it because, as you know better than I, considering, your digital strategy bent, stuff comes down the pipe and, what it looks like today invariably isn't what it looks like in 12, 18 or 24 months' time.
And I think another one of the challenges that CMOs have, or not just CMOs, but companies in general, is understanding their customers. I guess from my time, I found that companies just often struggle to have a clear view of their audience or customer, or let's say their customer segmentation. They've got sets everywhere. They're not sort of aligned in that front. And to me, it creates a lot of issues. And then they end up getting agencies or consultancies to help them. Why do you think, that's a common occurrence?
I think it just depends on the organisation, mate. It's like not. I don't know that I would say it's overly common. Some of the organisations I've dealt with, certainly in the recent past, have been incredibly good at understanding the customer or the various customer segments they are targeting, and then some are not so scientific. But I do think that the explosion of sort of data that exists out there sometimes, again, gets clients thinking maybe in the wrong way or in the wrong space. And what I mean by that is that obviously the better you understand your customer and really understand them, the better place you will, the better place you are to market to them and communicate to them. But some marketers, I think, place an over-reliance on, transactional data, quantitative data, the real rational sort of big data side of the puzzle. Not that that isn't important. It's obviously crucial. But they sometimes do that at the expense of what I would term small data, really understanding your audience in behavioral terms, how they think and feel about you as a brand, about your products, about the experiences that they have with you. And that sort of qualitative data is not always top of mind to some marketers. I mean, I think the good ones it is, but some of them push an over-reliance on big data versus that small data. And I think the route is you've got to have a very good understanding of both. But to answer your question, I think sometimes it's also healthy for clients to have partners who are independent in their view of your organisation and are not sort of encumbered with some of the internal pressures that exist, and therefore can give a very honest view of the consumer and the voice of that consumer. And I think agencies, typically have always been better placed to do that. Comms and sex agencies especially, that's their wheelhouse. That's what we do day in, day out. So I think it's, I don't know if that answers your question well, mate, but I do think that it depends on the client, but I think that the differentiator is, understanding that sort of motivating deep human insight that drives behaviour change. And that is something that you need to spend time on as an organisation, as a marketing team, because that sort of drives everything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes back to empathy, what you mentioned before. And I think it's like really understanding your customer and that those behavioural data points versus what I call, I guess, static data, the transactional stuff, which, I think there's another distraction point there when it comes to data because, everyone's focused on getting all the data, centralize it, but then sometimes it's all transactional, static data, and it's actually not going to help you that much with understanding customers. But if you can build assets that actually attract that behavioral data, that's worth, 50 times more than that transactional stuff.
Yeah, agree completely. And it's funny, that sort of stuff hasn't changed. That sort of approach has always been the approach for ever since modern marketing's been around. But I think we just sometimes get a bit caught up in how much data is available around a consumer, and of course, like anything, some data is valuable and some data isn't, and you got to be smart around sort of understanding the stuff that is.
And just want to move on to branding, because obviously you've worked on some massive brands over the years, the Toyotas, Westpacs, and you have an enormous list. From your perspective, what does branding play in the customer decision making process.
Yeah, I think it's, the most crucial factor. At the end of the day, think of a category, any category you care to think of, you will make a decision based on, generally speaking, a very small number of variables, price being one, and brand being the other. Generally speaking, those two are the key drivers of purchase decision. And I think, obviously once you know what it is that you want, and I think, it cannot be underestimated how important brand is to that process. And obviously, if it wasn't, then there'd be, the whole industry wouldn't exist. So, it's been a lot of people are gainfully employed because we know that that's the driver of growth. And you can, whether, you don't have to take my word for it, talk to smart people or listen to smart people. I mentioned, Benay Field, there's Mark Ritson, there's Byron Sharp and the whole team at, the Institute in South Australia. And they're all clever people, and they all, have a pretty solid, consistent point of view on how businesses grow and how brands drive that growth.
I find branding really interesting, and particularly when you actually go to a place and you take the brands away. So, for example, I remember I was in Turkey near Istanbul, and I went into a shop to go and buy some yogurt, and the Turkish people love their yogurt apparently, and there was like 30 yogurt brands, and I couldn't make a decision, so I didn't really know what to pick. And that to me kind of typified, that's what branding is, when you go in and you actually, it's something you trust, which is obviously probably the number one thing. And just knowing that, you can go back to, that's the value of a brand. And when you strip it out, it helped me understand the power of branding, I think.
Yeah, it shortcuts choice, and I think, brands are trust marks, right? So, your yogurt example, when you go into a supermarket in Sydney, there's the 10, 20, God knows, maybe 30, 40 different yogurt choices, but there'll be 2 or 3 in your head that you have used and you like and you are used to. And I know that I've got, a brand of yogurt in my fridge that I've been enjoying for 10 years, and I like it, and I don't waste time when I'm in there thinking about all the others. I just go straight to the one I want. And I think that you're right. That's the power of a brand, that it, in the plethora of choices that you can potentially make, you go straight to the one you want, because in your head there's a perception around the quality that brand will provide you. And that's a factor of a lot of things, of course, but that intangible power that the brand delivers to you at that moment of choice is the difference between getting a sale and not getting a sale.
Yeah. Do you think it also maybe plays to the fact that people are a bit lazy, in the sense that once they get something that works, they're happy with it, and then, like you say, you can just go and grab it, or, you buy an Apple product just without thinking about looking at the other ones, because you trust it, and that's the number one brand. Do you think that kind of that plays into it?
Yeah,
as well. I guess you're fighting for brand preference. You're the number one brand for a while until something better comes along, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people confuse that for loyalty, but in a lot of ways,
exactly.
In a lot of ways, that is the best type of loyalty, that you are defaulting to the same product over and over because it delivers for you every time, and until it fails to deliver, you generally don't want to waste time considering something else. And I think that's, you can call that human laziness, but I also think it's smart in a way. We've all got only a limited amount of time to do anything, and you want choices to be quick and satisfying. You want to make a decision on a product. If it's yogurt, and I suppose yogurt's not you're eating yogurt, so it is actually a pretty important decision. You don't want to eat something that you don't like, but there's some decisions that are less consequential if you don't get right. But most things, you definitely don't want to waste any time or effort on it. Even and obviously the further up the cycle you go in terms of the larger the decision, the larger the purchase, the much more important that becomes.
Yeah, I think it's probably more efficiency rather than laziness. But yeah, otherwise, if you're, criticizing every decision every day, you'd never sleep.
You'd go nuts. I often found that I worked for wine brands for a long time, and I think the sort of the biggest sort of decision paralysis occurs when you go into a wine shop and you just see, an incredible breadth of wines on a shelf. And it is really difficult, which is why design also plays an important part in that scenario, because often most of those brands people have not heard of. If you have heard of them, you go straight to the one you want. Sometimes you use price as a determinant, but design also plays a big factor. But it's all about the brand ultimately.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of like how much time you have. So sometimes you don't want to spend any time. You just want to get something and move on with your day. Or sometimes you might enjoy going to the wine shop and, having a browse. Like it's sort of different modes. So you need a design for almost both modes, essentially.
Indeed. I've certainly lost many an hour in a wine shop.
Yeah, so have I, mate.
Come out much the poorer for it.
Yeah, and then you end up with a case of beer and some bottle of tequila as well.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, I guess, building brands, and then it's often hard to get investment and trying to convince the leadership team to spend money on brand development or campaigns because the I guess predicting the ROI of brand work is quite hard to do. Mm. What are some tips you might have for CEOs who are in that position or senior marketers who are trying to pitch for more investment in doing like brand work that's hard to, I guess, attribute to or forecast that this brand work is going to do this thing or produce these results?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good question, mate. And it's something that also can often make or break campaigns, because a marketer just hasn't got the ability at a C-suite level to get heard correctly. And I think so. One of the things that we talk about and we also, work closely with our clients on is really understanding the language that's being used at the C-suite level. What's the language being used to drive their business, in terms of KPIs, in terms of the key determinants that that they're looking at in terms of a scoreboard in terms of what is driving their business, and then always couch marketing ROI within that framework. And so what do I mean by that? Is that don't just walk in and think that brand metrics alone are going to sway anyone in terms of investment. Yes, brand metrics are obviously a crucial part of measuring success, but you have to marry that with as much other rational data, sales data, call data, whatever the data is that really drives the business and sort of drives the CEO and CFO especially in terms of understanding what is going to be the key drivers of success of that business. And every business is slightly different, but understanding what those drivers are and making sure you use that language seamlessly within the work that you are presenting, then I think that makes a big difference. And I think the other thing that is really crucial is, sometimes marketing people are their own worst enemies because they don't have strong enough relationships with other departments or within an organisation, specifically sales teams. And so I think making sales teams your friends and sort of understanding what they need to be successful, and couching things in those terms, and sometimes presenting together is always a better chance of being successful than not, than sort of going in on your own and thinking you have all the answers.
It kind of comes back to that empathy point, understanding the C-suite and how they're thinking and what's important to them, and then also the sales team. So really at different levels, understanding different people's needs, and if you don't really think about the other areas of the business and how you can work together, then you're on your own and you're probably going to struggle.
Look, absolutely, and the best marketers that I've worked with understand that implicitly, and also spend time understanding all the aspects within the organisation that they need to understand to do their job properly. And I know that sounds really obvious, but not everyone does it. And I think people just, I don't know, whether they can't be bothered or they have too much on their to-do list and think that it's not a smart use of their time. But the more you understand all of those aspects, the better it is. And, certainly from an agency perspective, I make sure that our teams are talking to other departments, not just the marketing department, when it comes to understanding a business problem. Because as much as there are a lot of smart people in marketing teams, they don't always know all the information, and it is important to find out. You go into a call center, you find out a lot about an organisation, about what's going well, what isn't, what the customers really think. If you spend a bit of time in a call center, and not too many people like to do that, but trust me, it's a good way to get to the heart of an issue.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the best things you can do. Hearing a customer on the front line, dealing with their issues and hearing their challenges. But I think
it's one of the things I always do. I'm a you know this about me, but Saatchi's Toyota a client, St. George Bank a client, Nestle a client, Nescafe a client. I, bought a RAV4, moved all my home loans to St. George, filled my house with Nescafe products because I want to be a consumer as well as just an advisor. And it's only when you are sort of really understanding those things in depth that you get a better, more rounded, holistic picture of what the customer is going through. And that definitely helps me to be a better, better consultant, for want of a better way of putting it, to advise them on their marketing communications.
Yeah, walk a mile in the customer's shoes. I think that's, how long's that been around for? And we talk about customer experience now, but to be honest, I think that's been around for, thousands of years.
Forever. Yeah. Yeah. And I love my RAV4. It's great.
Little plug there for Toyota.
There you go. I'll have to ring them and ask for another discount. Anyway.
So the other thing that was interesting there is talking about, silos, and sometimes people stick to their own swim lane because I guess they have their own KPIs for their little department, and then in bigger organizations, they, the bigger the organization, the more the silos. And I don't think people, like you were hinting at, don't hate each other necessarily. They just kind of stick to their own little pod, which for me, if an organization is structured into products, they tend to be very product centric. So you might have, let's say, a car insurance team and a home insurance team who, they don't dislike each other. They just have never really worked together. But, there could be a lot of commonalities. And if they work better together, they could be actually, achieving good goals and working off each other. So I often find my job's been switching clients or colleagues from thinking to a customer-centric way, and trying to get them not to just think about product features, but think about the benefits to the customer in the advertising lens. But then also when you think more in that digital landscape, it's, you need to really think in the customer view and really understand their behavioural, challenges like we were talking about before. Do you have any tips on how to overcome that product-centric mindsets? Any sort of tips, from getting people to shift away from product features and that, people tend to lean towards them first because it's I think the easy thing to do rather than really understanding your customers?
Yeah, and look, it's easy to understand, right? Because some people spend all their time trying to build a better mousetrap, so they want people to understand that it is a better mousetrap. But I had an old boss who said something to me once, which I've always remembered, and I think he said it in relation to comms, but I think it applies to CX and experiences just as much, which is our job at the agency is to turn what the client wants to say into what the consumer wants to hear. And I think that very old sort of wise saying of an old boss of mine, is at the heart of what good businesses do. They understand that ultimately they're trying to convince a consumer to purchase their product or service. And the best way to do that is to get into their mindset, get into what they are thinking and feeling, and orient your approach to them through that lens.
So I just want to move on to building a great culture, because there's a lot of talk of employee experience and workplace culture at the moment. And it's something I've experienced you do firsthand exceptionally well. What do you think are some of the key elements to creating a great culture in the workplace?
Thanks, mate. Well, that's nice of you to say that. Maybe I'll start with another quote, which I heard from an old boss, which a good culture costs you nothing, but a bad culture can cost you your business. And I've seen that truth play out many times across my career. And I think that there's always some basics that are important to creating a good culture. But ultimately, the reason why you create a good culture is because if people feel valued and people feel motivated, they do their best work and you get better results. And actually, it's not just about business results, because also those people, grow. And that becomes a competitive advantage. So I think culture is a crucial aspect of any organisation, particularly a service-based organisation like agencies. And I think the way to create a good culture is a few things. Having, I think things that are important are good governance, and by that I mean clear expectations that everyone in the organisation are aware of, and that those expectations are consistently applied. Values that everyone buys into and are celebrated and used to drive behaviour. Clear and regular communication. Celebrating wins, having fun. I mean, some people think culture is just about having fun, and I think having fun's super important, but it's not the only thing that drives, a good culture. And whilst a leader needs to set the tone, I think it's also crucial that the leader is not the only person driving the culture. I think you need a team of people to drive culture. And I think, we see it in the best organisations. The best performing organisations tend to be ones that have the right culture. I do think, though, it's important, I have noticed, in the sort of the last few years with COVID and the working from home phenomenon is I think it's great to have balance, and we've had some very good policies well before COVID within Publicis Group around creating a balanced workplace where people are not slavishly sort of tied to the 9 to 5 desk thing. But I also think that there's been a shift, certainly in some organisations, too far the other way, where, I know some organisations that are 100% remote. And I think balance is important, because ultimately social interaction is important to creating the right culture and high performance. And I think you have to have a balance. Artur Sadoun, who's the CEO of global CEO of Publicis Group, he had a good line which he used in a global sort of town hall meeting a few years ago, which I use and have given to many a client to use. But the line is when asked about this balance of home and work, and certainly there's was a point where a lot of people wanted to just work from home and not come into the office. And his line was, you can work from home, but you can't grow from home. And I think it's one of those killer lines when you hear you go, oh, yeah, that's a good one. I'll use that.
I'll recycle that one.
But I've given it the right credit, to be fair. And the point is, it is true. And good cultures don't just grow businesses; they grow and develop people. And I think that's the bit that staff need to understand, that, and they do. You know, when you've got a good culture, they do understand that. But yeah, I mean, there's some of the things. There are lots of other things. Get a great social committee. That's the other thing.
Yeah, nice. And then I think from agencies, one thing that organisations could learn a lot from is selling ideas. When I went from agency side to client side, I noticed that having the ability to sell ideas or concepts through the organisation was a really big strength. And many people I feel inside organisations give up too early. So there's a big too hard basket, and I feel like it just grows and grows, and quite often it becomes a frustration point. But yeah, I feel like quite often I've seen people inside organisations hit a point and they give up too early. Yeah. And I think in the, agency and consultancy world, you hear stories of people really showing some determination and finding a way to keep an eye, not taking no for an answer, and finding a way to make ideas happen. So what are some of your selling tips that you might be able to pass on to those people who are maybe just struggling to get an idea across the line, or a concept or a program?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think, the resilience that is required to get, drive good ideas and good programs through organisations is crucial. I think I remember a CMO of a big financial institution, and this is the CMO, mind you, not the CEO. The CMO talk sort of guesstimating how much time they think about comms as part of their role. So comms within a CMO function, and how much time that person spent on comms as a priority within their sort of day-to-day to-do list. And it was kind of less than 5% was the guess. And so that was the CMO. So if you think that's what the CMO is dedicating to this stuff, then CEOs and others even less so. So I think it's just a good data point to drive home that just because it's consuming your life, it doesn't mean it's consuming other people's lives within the organisation. So I think that's an important thing to remember, because what it then drives is when you have an opportunity to speak to the C-suite about an issue, or to drive something through an organisation, whether it's with other departments, is you got to be brief. You got to be tight. The presentation's got to be compelling. Less is always more. And drive the presentation with confidence, and pride, and leave time for questions, and make sure you're prepared for all the questions that you're going to get, because what the finance team are going to ask is going to be different to what the sales team are going to ask, and the logistics team are going to ask, et cetera, et cetera. So you just, the more on top of your game you are, the more people are going to trust that your instinct and your point of view is the right one. And as we came back, as we spoke, right at the beginning of this podcast about sort of brands being a trust mark to quicker decision making. The same thing applies to you as your personal brand as a CMO, and the way you conduct yourself within an organisation. If you're perceived to be someone who's on top of their game and knows what they're doing, then you're going to get less pushback. If you're very wishy-washy in terms of how you sort of present something, or how you come back on an argument, then people are going to have doubts. So I think that's always the thing that we talk about when we're helping clients sort of present through an organisation. The good thing is, I think agencies are a really good training ground particularly around speaking to all levels within organisations. And some people who are some of the smartest people I've ever worked with have an inability to communicate correctly to senior people, and that's just practice, really. The good thing about agencies, even from the early, entry level points at sort of organisations, you get to deal with senior people, and and sometimes you have to do that in a time constrained and stressful sort of environment, but you have to get your point across and you have to do it succinctly, and those kind of lessons are great because they build resilience and confidence. And I think resilience and confidence are the two most important things when you're going into an important meeting to sell a program in. The reality is there's a million different ways to do something. There is no perfect way to attack a marketing problem. There's multiple different ways in, but you have to align yourself and back something. And the person that can present that with confidence is generally the person that'll win. So
agencies are known for going to all sorts of lengths to try and sell ideas and win business. What's one of the legendary stories that you've heard over the years that sort of stuck in the back of your mind?
Well, there are lots of stories. Some I don't think I can repeat on a urbane and professional podcast like the one that you're conducting here, but one that's probably on the edge, but kind of really highlights the lengths that an agency has gone to in the past, which I thought was quite interesting, was so this is a big New York agency, and whenever a major meeting finished, whether it was a pitch meeting or a major client presentation meeting, the clients would leave the building and then jump into cabs to go back to their office. And there was a cab rank right out the front, and the cab drivers knew this was a standing order, and they would get briefed by the PAs just before the clients came out of the building that they would be paid to come back to the office and recant any information that was discussed in the cab about the presentation, good or bad, and they use that information to help them sway the decisions moving forward. So I thought that was quite a sort of
pretty interesting, isn't it?
It's a way clever.
If that's your customers, you're trying to, or clients, you're trying to figure out, I guess, that trying to really understand them. I think that sort of, they
were trying to get an honest read on what I think that part of the problem with when you're in this kind of business is you don't always get an honest perspective from a client. Sometimes they're trying to, obviously they want to avoid conflict, or they want to not hurt your feelings, or whatever the case may be. But it's important to get that honest point of view. And this was just, I thought, a really clever way of getting that warts and all perspective on what a client thinks about what they've just seen. So anyway, quite clever. I don't know that anyone's employing that trick anymore, but and now that I've blown it for everyone, it's
well, maybe you could start a new Uber service for ad agencies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There you go. Well, yeah, what a good story to kind of finish up on. So yeah, we'll wrap it up there, Ant. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to have a chat. You're always good to catch up and have a chat.
No, it's always good to see you, mate. I miss working with you, and congratulations on the podcast and the business that you've got moving forward. I'm sure you'll be very successful, mate.
Thanks, mate. And I'm sure everyone's looking forward to seeing what you do next. But until then, enjoy your time on the golf course.
Yeah, I will. See you, buddy.
Thanks for tuning in. Some amazing insights from an absolute legend. If you found this insightful, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button now, as we have some great episodes coming up. And if you have any questions or would like to chat to us, then reach out to us at customersmarts.co. Catch you next time.